God must really exist because, we're in a fight for the human soul right now, and there's a dark force trying to get us and destroy humanity.
I am a husband, a father, a lawyer, a Christian, and a proud Canadian. I started this series because it was clear that our nation needs truth. Not just another biased narrative, but real information of substance. We need access to facts and the freedom to think for ourselves. I'm Leighton Grey, and this is Grey Matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grey Matter. Well, today on the program, we have quite a treat for you. It's international best-selling author Dr. Naomi Wolf, who has written several books, some of which, especially the recent ones, are of great interest to our readers and listeners. Welcome to the program, Naomi. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be with you.
All right. Well, we usually start our program with some aphorisms that hopefully you won't find distasteful. The first one is from Klaus Schwab, who wrote, "The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to neglect, reimagine, and reset our world." Next, from Dr. Anthony Fauci, don't retch, Naomi. "I believe I have a personal responsibility to make a positive impact on society." From H.L. Mencken, who wrote, "The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary." And finally, from John Galsworthy, who wrote, "The law is what it is, a majestic edifice sheltering all of us, each stone of which rests on another." Well, who do we have in the show today? Well, Naomi Wolf. Naomi graduated from Yale in 1984 and was a Rhodes Scholar at New College, Oxford University. She's the author of many best-selling books, some of which we're going to talk about today. And she's also a frequent contributor to a series of publications, many of which are well known to our audience, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the New Republic, the Washington Post, Glamour, and many others. And so we're very grateful to have you on the program today, Naomi, to talk about especially a few of your books. And I'd like to start with one that you wrote about 16 years ago. I read this recently, but I found that it was incredibly prescient. And it really hit, it almost predicted a lot of the things that we're seeing today. And this is Give Me Liberty. And my first question for you is, back when you were writing that book, did you have, what was it that drew you to these subjects, which seemed to have predicted many things that the rest of us were not quite aware of at the time?
Yeah, great question. Well, it probably matters that my grandmother lost 9 brothers and sisters in the Holocaust. And so the knowledge that robust, or even like Germany was a democracy, it was a fragile democracy, but Romania, where my grandma's family got butchered, there was no indication in advance that that society could turn. It was a modern, sophisticated, civil society. So I guess from my family history, I always knew that things can look really good on the surface, and then very quickly, people can turn into barbarians, and people can be sent off in cattle cars and so on. And then in the Bush era, I wrote a book called The End of America, and Give Me Liberty is the sequel. And I felt the need to write it because I was hearing things that Bush Jr. was saying and seeing things that he was doing that rang a bell historically. Like, oh, I've heard that before. This place outside the rule of law where you can hold people forever. I've heard of that before. The invoking a terrifying internal and external threat in the form of the rationale for the global war on terror, endless war, the rewriting of the rules so that you can do anything, anywhere to anyone, and terrorism makes it okay. I've heard that before. And so in that book, it was a very useful exercise because it did turn out to be prescient, not because I'm a genius or a psychic, but because history has certain rules when it comes to suppressing democracies. So I looked at times and places around the world where democracies had been undermined or overthrown. And I found that there was really a script that all would-be tyrants, whether they're on the left or on the right, take the same 10 steps. And, I won't go through all 10, but they start recognizably enough by, and your Mencken quote was, relevant to this, by invoking a terrifying internal and external threat. And then they end with martial law. So because I saw that in 2008, I wrote the sequel, Give Me Liberty, which is about, well, what do you do to avoid that, right?
Yes.
Like, how do you get your democracy back? And so I really kind of kicked the tires of American democracy. And that was sobering because I found that it wasn't very strong at all. It was very fragile. It was broken. It was ripe for the kind of wholesale dismantling that we've seen in 2020 to the present, same with Canadian democracy for that matter, though I didn't go into that in either of those books. So Give Me Liberty kind of breaks down what do you need in order to make it harder for the bad guys to take your rights away, to take your constitution away, or your charter of laws, charter of rights, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
And then the rest is very recognizable. Like I wrote kind of the sequels to those books. In our current era, in 2021 to 2022, I wrote The Bodies of Others.
Bodies of Others,
and
yes.
Sequel to that, which is Facing the Beast, basically picking up where I left off, because unfortunately, by June of 2020, I realized we were at step 10 in the 10 steps to tyranny, which is martial law.
I'm glad that you pieced those three together, because that means I'm not off the mark, because I did exactly the same thing when I read these three books recently. You mentioned Canada. Of course, we seem to be further. We're on sort of step 11 in the dystopian trek. And, one of the things that really struck me about that book, Give Me Liberty, is that it really struck on this idea that if we want to have a free and democratic society, it's up to us. We have to actually walk it out and talk it out and do things. We can't just sort of press autopilot.
Right.
And the message I got from that book is that if we're going to have a free society, we have to be there. We have to be present, because if we're not, the bad people will come in and take everything over. And so that leads me to ask you this question. Now, you're from Yale, so you know what's going on there right now in terms of sort of this occupation that's happening there and at Columbia, and for that matter, it's happening here in Canada at places like McGill and University of British Columbia. Do you see sort of the taking over, the surrendering of these universities as part and parcel of the problem that you're predicting in Give Me Liberty?
Absolutely. I mean, as I keep posting on my social media, that the narrative is Israel-Palestine. And I don't mean to be unsympathetic, to the horrors going on in that part of the world at all.
Right.
But while the narrative is Israel-Palestine, the target is the US and Canada and these other especially Western countries around the world, where the universities are being occupied and order is being overthrown. And the reason I say that, I've been saying since 2020, very much influenced by my husband, Brian O'Shea, who spent most of his career in military intelligence and then in intelligence, that, we're at war. Canada's at war. It's a different kind of war. You guys have kind of been overthrown. I'm really sorry, but we're fighting the war down here. And just because it doesn't involve like armies and invasions doesn't mean a war is not being waged against us, against our institutions, against our rule of law, our social contract, our culture, and our bodies. I've done a lot of work on injections, and this is clearly a bioweapon manufactured by our enemies, distributed by our enemies. I can leave that aside for now. But the universities, first let me say, having gone to those kinds of universities, that chaos would not be happening if it wasn't being allowed to happen.
Right. Yeah.
Categorically. And B, again, got to credit my husband. He's done very impressive research showing that Black Lives Matter and these other kind of, not that racism isn't an issue, but that these kind of sudden, Jewish Voice for Peace, which I actually used to be part of, these immediate kind of show up and have a protest events there's literally a website where you swipe your credit card and you hire people to show up. The posters get printed, the T-shirts get printed, the no doubt pussy hats get manufactured or
Well, they all have
distributed.
the same tents. When you look on it, everybody has the same tent at Columbia.
Absolutely, and so this is a kind of manufactured thing, and it's funded by deep pockets, and you can trace back the deep pockets, but they're not our friends. They don't want our stability, and they're not organic, is the point. So what do I want to say about these protests right now is that the real message, especially because a number of universities have responded to this by closing or saying they're not going to have graduation, the real message to the West's next generation is no social contract is, you can't trust any social contract. There's no point in planning for the future. There's no point in working hard. It can all be undone at the touch of a button. But the other thing that I'm very concerned about, and I don't like being so right in my predictions, is this is a very serious national security threat right now. Because think about what's happening. At Columbia, they're locking the kids in, right, with bike locks. The kids are being locked in. Many universities, there's a kind of a cordon situation in which the kids are kind of being lured into what could be a trap, a crowded, organized group. And there are people who are not students, who are definitely, faces covered, definitely part of the planning, the execution. I mean, as I said on Twitter, most 19-year-olds in North America can't make their bed or pick up towels off the floor. Do they have the, capability to organize a multi-campus protest in this organized way? No, God bless them, right? But this is clearly the work of outsiders as well. And my real worry is that, what happened on October 7th? What happened on October 7th is terrorists infiltrated a fun gathering of young people and took hostages, and just taking a few hostages brought Israel to its knees, right? And created a security strike on the whole country. Well, and this relates to the immigrants, which may be a separate thing, may be related. They're being placed at strategic locations throughout the United States in barracks type situations, which no immigrants ever have been, collective housing paid for by the government, bus different places, flown different places to very sensitive locations like Chicago O'Hare Airport and, around the corner from where we are now in Massachusetts, very throughout the country. All I'm saying is literally at one signal, you could have a situation in which hundreds of children of elites are being held hostage.
Could you have predicted? Obviously, you're a Jewish person, a very prominent, well-known person of Jewish heritage. Could you have predicted the alignment of the pro-Palestinian movement with the left? Is that something that you foresaw, or are you shocked by that?
I'm not shocked by it. First, let me just say, there's a lot to protest. I believe in the international rule of law. A lot of what's done to the Palestinian people is totally illegal. My husband and I have this debate all the time, and he has the advantage of being in war, and I, just write about war and observe war. But, the way that Israel makes war against civilians is illegal. The way that Hamas makes war against civilians is illegal. No one should bring civilians into the fight. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not surprised. The left has been, reasonably enough concerned about Palestinians for a long time. But these kids are saying what is new is that these kids are not saying ceasefire now, right? They're not saying peaceful two-state solution. They're not saying, bring diplomats to the table. They're saying intifada and we are Hamas, right? And from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, that's a completely different foreign policy. That's a foreign policy that wipes Israel off the map and presumably wipes Jewish Israelis off the map. So that's new, right? We didn't, those of us who were on the left, which I used to be in 2014, the last invasion of Gaza, we were saying ceasefire, stop bombing hospitals, stop bombing schools, elect people who are going to negotiate, let's have peace in the region. That's not what we're hearing now. So the left in North America has gone so far off the deep end and is so infiltrated that I am not surprised, but I am kind of shocked that there's this kind of uncritical embrace of, Hamas is not, you wouldn't want to live under Hamas, like
no.
Gay people.
Or Sharia law for that matter.
Yeah. Exactly. So the uncritical acceptance of this very, very extremist view of what should be done about Palestine is surprising, I guess. But the left has been so stupid since 2020. It goes along with the other stupidity.
Yes, and you talk about your alienation from that sort of group in your most recent book, but I want to talk a little bit about the bodies of others. And I found this was just, when I read it, really a shattering book in a lot of ways. And the one thing that's unique about that book for me was it really captured the dehumanizing effect of these bioweapons, of these drugs on human beings. It wasn't just an attack on freedom. It wasn't just a political attack. It wasn't a health issue. It actually was about dehumanizing, about really violating the integrity of the human body and therefore of humanity. Was that something that that really struck you, that was sort of an impetus for you to write that book? Or what exactly drew you to that particular subject matter? Because obviously you've suffered a lot of great personal cost in order to produce such an important book that's impacted many people's lives.
It's very kind of you to say. Well, I guess, thank God for the study of history, right? I'd read, actually for my book, The Beauty Myth, I'd read The Nazi Doctors by Robert J. Lifton. And that's a really important book for our time. But I also read, as an unvaccinated person kind of experiencing this sudden eruption of discrimination, I read also a book called Racial Hygiene, which is also about the Nazi doctors. And, I'm familiar with Jim Crow laws, and I'm familiar with, how France was occupied. And I'm familiar with the history of ghettos and, the whole history. There's a rich history of discrimination to look at, of discrimination societies. And so I quickly recognized that medical status was being used as a proxy to create a discrimination society that was legally exactly like Jim Crow laws, or, putting people on a reservation, not letting them assemble, or restricting assembly, in other ways like the Warsaw Ghetto. Basically, my study of free versus unfree societies led me quickly with the mandates to recognize that you don't restrict people's movement if people are free. Right? In a free society, you don't restrict people's movement ever. Even the history of quarantine, the history of disease, which, thank God, I'd read 400 years of, novels and memoirs and diaries in English, because there were many, many, many waves of disease in Britain and North America, and never, even quarantine didn't look like that. And like what we were being told quarantine looked like, or quarantine camps, or, lockdowns, never. So that is, on reservations, yes. If you're in the Warsaw Ghetto, yes. If you're in North Korea, yes. But never in the history of free people in the West. So I guess from that background, I recognized that nothing that was being done in the name of COVID, or, the vaccine, unvaccinated, vaccinated, unvaccinated dialectic had anything to do with public health. And I recognized political and an exertion of tyranny. And again, just as I said, like, what's the true goal of occupying these universities is to destroy, the most sacred place in our society, which is, where kids are educated. The goal was also to destroy unity and civil society, which it did.
Your most recent book, I found, was a very beautifully written book. Not that the others aren't. But there was a kind of an artistry to it. For example, when you write about when you first went to Yale, the experience of going there, having been raised in California, just being part of that. It must be very painful for you now to see what's going on at these universities, you know, just based upon, you know, what you wrote about being part of that and spending so much of your life being in and around that world of academia and the university. The other two things that really struck me about this book was the very tender description of your relationship with your husband, and also the searching, the very, very tender way that you're searching for faith and how this has really enriched your life. And with all of that, my question for you is, were you searching for something different in terms of writing this particular book? It's certainly a sequel, I would say, to Bodies of Others. But honestly, I was surprised, having read the other two first, at the sort of tenderness that came out in this book. There was much of your heart in this book. Not that it's not in the others, but am I off the mark, or am I getting close?
No, that's a very perceptive reading, and I appreciate the care, you know, with which you read those books, and you notice there is definitely a different tone and style in Facing the Beast, and it is a return to, you know, my roots. At the very start of my life as a writer, I started as a poet, and I kind of got detoured away from poetry by all the political issues that had to be addressed through nonfiction. But my, you know, my heart as a writer is in that kind of literary style, that more poetic style. I guess that's so interesting, but why did I think what happened between the writing of The Bodies of Others and the writing of Facing the Beast is that I got completely ejected by the left, right? And by my world as a, you know, by my life as a well-known writer.
And that pain is very tangible. That pain is very tangible in the book, by the way.
Right. But I guess, you know, more positively, I don't know that this was probably unconscious, but I don't know that before I got completely ejected, I don't know whether I would have given myself permission to write as openly about those subjects, about love and God and, you know, and poetry, because I try not to think that I'm, you know, fitting into a bracket, you know, but inevitably we write a bestseller, and then we're a famous nonfiction writer, and then you keep writing books that are, you know, in that genre. So I think being kind of cast out into the wilderness, like, okay, I've got nothing to lose. I might as well go back to the voice that is most, I guess, personal or intimate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And is that sort of what led to this spirituality? And just to use another metaphor, you know, it's hard to imagine the author of The Beauty Myth ending up with a man who you described your husband as, and he sort of seems like a Renaissance man. You know, the way you describe him, he's very intelligent, well-educated, but he's also this guy who's teaching you how to shoot guns and hunts things and, you know, chops wood. And it seems sort of incongruous for someone who's one of the world's most famous feminists to end up with this sort of John Wayne, Clint Eastwood type. Is that something that you wanted to portray in the book, or is that, or what do you have to say about that?
I mean, first, it's true, right? And it is funny, and it's like a great cosmic joke. Just for the record, I was never one of those feminists who thought there wasn't a need for men. You know, I think men are very useful.
Woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that never made sense to me. But you know, I met my husband when I was getting death threats, and he was my security advisor. So he specializes in counter stalking. And so he made my stalkers go away. And so, you know, that's a great opening for a great, you know, love story. And it's not the first, right?
No.
But I don't know what to say. Like I guess opposites attract in a sense. We are from very different worlds, but we're also weirdly similar, right? And, you know, we're both like in a war, and we recognize it. And so I think we both have kind of I'm not going to like flatter myself by saying I have a warrior spirit, but I think we both understand that we are fighting a war. We have to be brave. We can't just stop.
Mm-hmm.
It is really painful and awful sometimes. And I've learned a lot about warfare from him, because he's
Mm-hmm.
literally been in
Mm-hmm.
conflict situations,
Yeah.
so much, and he studied the history of war. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's funny, but it also makes sense. Like, it's
Right.
ironic, but it also makes sense.
And it comes together, it sort of dovetails with the quest for spirituality that's in this book, in that you talk about courage, faith, and resistance in a new dark age. But what I read, or what I understood, was that all this courage and this faith, it's somewhat of a release from the fear that was in your previous book, because obviously Bodies of Others,
Mm,
in a lot of ways, is a very terrifying book.
yeah.
Because what's revealed in there. But I didn't get the same sense of fear in that in your new book that was in the second book. Even though
Interesting.
you're learning how to shoot guns and everything, I had the impression that this new spirituality that you're discovering is something that has really enriched your life, and it's been sort of something that's removed. Maybe even though it's a fearful, dreadful situation we're all living through, I didn't get the sense that now you're living in fear. You're living in a sort of state of preparedness and sort of searching for faith. Not to brand it as a religious book, but I mean, there's a lot of religious content in this book, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Again, very thoughtful response to the book. I don't think of it as religious content because the more I kind of go on the journey of faith, the
Mm-hmm.
less I think religion has the answer. Any religion, right?
Yeah.
It's so much not about religion in my view. It's
Yeah.
really about kind of, we're actually held in the hands of a cosmic being who loves us. Like, that's not even a metaphor. It's actually really true. But I, yes. So yes, I mean, to kind of fast forward for people who haven't read the book, I guess it's interesting you read it as an absence of fear. I think what happened between the Bodies of Others and Facing the Beast is the Pfizer documents. And
Mm-hmm.
so I oversee a project run by this genius COO of mine named Amy Kelly, who for her part is overseeing 3,250 doctors and scientists who have volunteered to read through the Pfizer documents. And what they found is the greatest crime against humanity in recorded history. And so as I was, writing Facing the Beast, I also had to, for 100 reports, go on War Room or go on any show that would have me and say, okay, this is report number 27. 80% of women in this part of Pfizer documents had spontaneous abortions or miscarriages. Okay, this is report number 18. They knew by November of 2020 the vaccines didn't work to stop COVID. Here's the report on strokes. Half of the serious adverse events were within 48 hours of receiving the vaccine. Like on and on and on of they knew they were disabling people. They knew they were killing people. They knew they were killing children. They knew they were, a huge focus on reproduction. And our most recent report, Amy Kelly's most recent report, is actually about Ontario, which confirms data from Alberta, and Canadian government data show catastrophic reproductive damage to the people of Ontario in the years 2021 to 2022. Catastrophic. So, and I know why, because I've read the reports of what's in the Pfizer documents. Pfizer focused on disrupting reproduction. They knew they were going to do it. They knew they were ruining women's menses. They knew there was something in the semen of vaccinated men that was damaging. They knew that they were going to cause miscarriages, that they were going to kill babies. They knew it all. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that is like opening the gates of Auschwitz, right after the end of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do? You could go crazy. I could go crazy. I could become a drug addict, or, I could be like, okay, I'm looking at a mass grave, that was intentionally dug and built and created, and people were intentionally pushed into it. Evil exists. And so since I'm seeing that evil exists, and I saw it earlier with the kind of lockstep nature of the lockdowns and so on, there must be don't know why seeing the worst thing that could happen led me to believe more strongly in God. But I mean, maybe it's just a defense, against the void, like the Nietzschean void, when you stare at
Sure.
the void starts to stare back. But
Right.
I did kind of conclude that we're in post-human history now, and that we're in some sort of metaphysical history where it's a battle between good and evil. And I saw it. I saw it's not just like 2 or 3 crazy Nazis doing this. It's like your whole medical system, our whole medical system, all the doctors, all the gynecologists, all the obstetricians, with a handful, all the churches, all the synagogues, except for your client, and 3 other people, right? All the journalists, so I guess I concluded that God must really exist because, we're in a fight for the human soul right now, and there's some dark force trying to get us and destroy humanity. So we must matter, and the outcome must matter, and there must be a benign force against which this is warring. That was my best conclusion.
Yeah, well, I quite agree, and it's a beautiful book. And thank you for writing it. Your books, all of them, the ones I've read, are brilliant, and we're so grateful that you took this time with us, Naomi, to learn more about you and what you're writing. Is there something that you're working on right now? Your next project?
Good question. Well, our most urgent thing right now at Daily Clout, which is my company, is an election integrity bill. So everyone watching in the United States, please go to dailyclout.io and download that bill and get it passed, get a sponsor in your state legislature and invite me to your state legislature, because I'm going at my own expense to any state legislature that will have me. And the next one, what is the next one going to be about? I'm reading the Geneva Bible from beginning to end, and that's a 1560 Bible that was translated directly from the Hebrew. It's the Puritans' Bible. It's the Founders' Bible. And I'm finding that a lot of later versions have been mistranslated to really shockingly depict God in a much more negative light. And that's what the later translations do. So that's probably going to be my next book, and people can follow those also on Daily Clout or on my Substack. Outspoken.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to that, and best of luck with this project that you're endeavoring with the U.S. election. So again, thank you so much for taking this time with us and being our special guest today on Grey Matter.